Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I'm Tony Gerdeman here, as always, with Tom or Tom. How's it going?
Tony, we have another listener question show. This is a Michigan fan listener question show. And I was looking through the questions we're going to go through. And the first one, it's less a question and more of a manifesto. And the name on it, I don't want to say who it was. I don't want to dox anyone. C Stallions. No, that's too obvious. Connor S, the first one. So yeah, it is a real genuine manifesto, no vacuum cleaners included, but that's okay. Are we ready to just dive in?
Let's do it. Let's dive in.
All right.
Prepare
Deep
yourselves.
breath. We got a lot coming here. Here we go. Ryan Day is not as comfortable going into this game as Sharon Moore is, and it's not even close. They see this game completely different as far as confidence level. Plus, it's in Ann Arbor, and it's supposed to be in the 30s with a 40% chance of snow. Michigan won at the shoe with a walk-on quarterback, no explosive athletes to speak of on offense, without their best offensive player, Colston Level, and their best corner as 21-point dogs. Ohio State is going to have to fight for every yard for 4 quarters, and will have to play a game that isn't their identity to win. Michigan is going to run too high and let Ohio State dink and dunk between the 20s, and it will look like Ohio State is gashing them, but it will all be by design, and Ohio State will realize that when they're kicking field goals and they have 16 to 20 points going into the back end of the fourth quarter when it's too late, like the last 4 years. Ohio State isn't running it down Michigan's throat or throwing for 3 touchdowns. This game will look different than anything they've seen this year, and like every year these past 4, Michigan is going to be laying the wood all game long. This will be a very low possession game, 27-17, Mich again. From @King of the North. Tony, he didn't say how Michigan was going to get to 27 points. Do they find some in did they get some like DoorDash to them? How does Michigan get to 27 points in this scenario?
Well, there's always the freebie that Ohio State gives them. So, the 7-yard touchdown drive.
How does Michigan score 20 points against the Ohio State defense, Tony?
That is also a fair question. I do like the fact that he mentioned that they're only going to be kicking field goals, yet he gives Ohio State 17 points. So
5 field goals and a safety, and it's an intentional safety. Ohio State doesn't earn it because they're cowards.
And all of these field goals are from like 45 yards out or more. I understand the history lesson from last year. Last year was about as flukish as you can get, so you can't make a blueprint out of a fluke, and that's what last year's was. Now, can you do similar things and maybe hope Ohio State does similar things? Yes, there's a lot of hope in there, and that's not necessarily strategy. Ohio State dinking and dunking, they are very patient throwing the ball, and they'll be okay taking some of that. But also, we've seen Michigan try to be conservative defensively in the past, and it hasn't mattered. Receivers can still get behind them. In terms of looking like the last 4 years, there's two like distinct eras of the Michigan-Ohio State game. 21 and 22, those games are separated by like 18.5 points. 23 and 24, those games are separated by like 4.5 points. Again, why the difference? Who knows? But it's not like these 4 years have all been the same. It's just been, the victor has been the same. But when he says Ohio State isn't running it down Michigan's throat or throwing for 3 touchdowns, they can do, like, they're not doing either of those things, then yeah, they're probably not, maybe they're not going to win, but I think they'll be able to run enough. And I think, 2 touchdowns and running enough in terms of passing touchdowns, may be enough. Again, I'm with you that 27 points seems like a lot for Michigan, 17, not enough for Ohio State. And through all of these words, his and mine, I'm with you right where you started. The 27 is the biggest issue here.
Yeah, and, I think one of the big differences, last year was absolutely, that is you needed everything to go one specific way. And if you play that game 10 times, Ohio State wins at 9. And so Michigan rolled the 20 and got the win. And so there they, and you're not taking anything away from it, but that also doesn't mean that's a real repeatable thing. Just because you had, just because it happened once does not mean that exact same thing is going to happen again. And this is a different Michigan team and it's a different Ohio State team. The biggest, the quarterback play for Michigan, absolutely better this year. No question. The wide receiver play, absolutely better this year. No question. How's the defensive line? How's the offensive line? That's where Michigan has won this game for the last several years. And this year's lines are not up to the standard of some of the recent ones. And that's where Michigan is absolutely better in several areas than they were in previous years. But this game, Sherrone Moore with a big smile on his face talked about this game being one of the trenches. Who's going to win the game in the trenches this week? I don't know that this is a game that I don't know that this is a game where Michigan has an advantage on either side of the ball in the trenches. It might be a push, but that's where they've won the game, and they don't have that advantage this year, I don't think. So I think that's one big change. And, I think Matt Patricia has you were not in Times Square in the 1980s with me, but you used to have those guys who'd come up to you and offer to sell you a watch, and they'd slide their sleeve up and they had a whole arm full of watches. I think Matt Patricia has a whole bunch of stuff up his sleeve this week. And Bryce Underwood is going to be pushed to do stuff in spots where he has not been asked to do stuff, some of the stuff before. I don't know that Michigan's going to be able to run the ball down Ohio State's throat. And if they're not, then that puts a lot on a true freshman quarterback and a true freshman wide receiver against a defense that's going to be doing a bunch of stuff that he hasn't, that has confused 50-year guys this year. So that would be, if I'm a Michigan fan, that would be my concern, sort of those areas. I don't think Ohio State's scoring 45 points this weekend by any means, unless Michigan turns the ball over 5 times like they did against Northwestern. I don't think they're scoring 45 points against Michigan's defense by any means. I don't think they're necessarily scoring in the 30s against Michigan's defense. I don't see Michigan scoring 27 points. I mean, you want to give me a team total of Michigan over under 24.5. I will gleefully take the under for whatever stakes you'd like. I don't really see that happening.
Yeah. And the last thing for me is when he says this game will look different than anything Ohio State has seen this year, I would say the same thing for Michigan in terms of the talent on offense, the defensive scheme, and talent on defense. So this will be different than anything a suspect secondary has seen and a suspect or a true freshman quarterback has seen.
Next turn from @Timothy Miller 3902. Great show, guys. As a Michigan fan, I always watch the Michigan Mondays. 2 questions. How is Julian Sayin when he's flushed outside the pocket and throwing on the move? Secondly, what is the best position group on the Buckeyes' dominant defense? Keep up the good work and go blue. So I'll start with the Sayin thing. Sayin is not a running quarterback by any means. Sayin is not Denard Robinson. Sayin is not even Bryce Underwood. He can get out of the pocket and he can, get you 6 yards if he needs to, but that's not what he does. In terms of getting out of the pocket and throwing, he's actually been pretty good. We've seen, I think the Wisconsin game, there were a couple of throws that he made where he was kind of on the run and didn't set his feet and still made a nice throw that, mechanically still pretty solid. Bryce Underwood, when he gets off platform, it gets a little wonky looking. Sayin's just better mechanically right now, even when he's kind of on the move. So, I don't think you're going to see a ton of, Michigan's game plan probably involves getting Bryce Underwood out of the pocket and letting him throw. I don't know that Ohio State is perfectly happy to let Sayin sit back in the pocket, but if he's flushed, I don't think that's going to, I don't think you see the absolute panic out of him. And I don't think you see, wildly inaccurate throws when he's not with his feet set.
Yeah, I would agree with that. They like to keep Sayin in the pocket because he can see the entire field. Moving Underwood out of the pocket allows you to lessens his choices and the decisions that he has to make. It makes things maybe an easier read when you're only reading half the field. Where with Sayin, they're okay with him reading the entire field, but he's been accurate everywhere. I don't know that we've seen him too much running to his left and throwing, other than with some designed rollouts and shorter passes. But he's been accurate everywhere. In terms of the second question, what is the best position group on the Ohio State defense? You can make an argument for about the only thing you can't make an argument for is defensive tackle, but you can make an argument for defensive tackle because you can make an argument for the ends with Kenyatta Jackson and Caden Curry. Caden McDonald is going to be up for several awards this year. The linebackers, everybody, you'll see a lot of people telling you that Ohio State has the 2 best linebackers in the nation, or the best linebackers group in the nation. Is there a better pair of corners than Davis Nigbenausen and Jermaine Matthews? Wherever you want to put Lorenzo Styles in corner at safety, Caleb Downs and
Jalen McClain.
Jalen McClain. Like, maybe if I'm to choose which one, I would probably go with Arvell Reese and Sonny Styles, and then also Peyton Pierce as the third linebacker. And we're probably going to see a lot of Peyton Pierce this week.
Yeah, I think I landed on linebackers as well, but I think you could make a decent argument for basically any of them. There's not a glaring weakness on this year's Ohio State team. And the one that I think we went into the year thinking was going to be the glaring weakness was defensive tackle. And Caden McDonald has gone from first-time starter who we think is going to be pretty good to like, oh, this guy is like an absolute home wrecker. This guy is going to just, blow up a lot of plays. And I talked to Ross Fulton, our X's and O's guy, about the Ohio State defense, and he talked about just Michigan and being such a zone-heavy team, and the interior of the Michigan offensive line. Greg Crippen, not huge. Like they've got some small, relatively smaller guys in the interior of the offensive line, and younger guys in the interior of the offensive line. This could be a Caden McDonald game. Like you could see a lot of 98 in the backfield, and if you do, that really throws Michigan's run game off. So going into the year, I think defensive tackle was sort of the big question, the big concern, especially from the depth piece. They've sort of answered that. Safety, who was going to play next to Caleb Downs? Jalen McClain's done a nice job all season, and if Caleb Downs is part of that group, that's obviously something you can very easily make a case for. Well, if Caleb Downs is the best defensive player in college football, then you'd make a decent case for the Ohio State safeties being the strongest unit on the team. But yeah, I'm with you. I think Arvell Reese is another guy who has gone from, first-time starter, we'll see, he was sort of that third guy last year, and we'll see how it goes, to like maybe future top 5 NFL draft pick in a matter of 5 months. So I think I would go linebackers there, and not for the reason you even would have necessarily said before the year, which is Sonny Styles, who has also been really good. All right, next one from @JBayon Jr. A few questions for you. Number one, has Sayin had to face anything comparably difficult as this game on the road? Maybe Washington, and how did he look? We'll take these one at a time. Yeah. The Washington game was, the Washington game is probably the best comp, because the other road games were Illinois, which was, the crowd was there early, the crowd was into it, but it's not a huge stadium. It's not a particularly loud stadium. Wisconsin, where the student section was about a third full 7 minutes before the game, and Ohio State kind of jumped out right away, and it was very clear what was going to happen. And Purdue, which is literally Purdue. So I think Washington is the best comp here. I know Washington is 40,000 seats fewer than Michigan Stadium. Michigan fans, I assume some of you made the trip out there last year. Number one, you should make a trip out there, because that place is awesome. That is a great place to watch a football game. Number two, it's a lot like Oregon, where you look at the number of seats and you go, this can't be as loud as they say. It's like, oh no, that's a real loud place. And that was early in the season. That was September 20th, 27th. So that was, I think, was it the week after Michigan played Nebraska? I don't remember who Michigan was playing that week, but just, or late September. And so the Ohio State offense was still sort of taking shape, and they were still kind of leaning on the defense, because I think they kind of knew Washington's offense is not going to be able to do much against the Ohio State defense. So Ohio State was just kind of controlled the ball, methodical. They didn't put a ton on Julian Sayin's plate, but he also, in a loud, hostile road environment, did not look remotely rattled, did not look remotely bothered, which I think is probably the most relevant portion to this question, because it's obvious a little bit of a different defense. Michigan's defense is much better than Washington's defense this year. We'll say that up front. But just in terms of being on the road in a loud, hostile environment, having to operate at a silent count, all that kind of stuff, that didn't seem to bother him at all.
I will say, in conference play this year and Big Ten play this year, Washington and Michigan defensively are both giving up 4.9 yards per play. So while it's the most comparable in terms of environment and being on the road and that kind of difficulty, it's probably also the best defense that he's faced this year. You could say Penn State, but that's at home, and he was 20 of 23 for 316 yards and 4 touchdowns. at Washington, Julian saying it was 22 of 28, 2 touchdowns, 208 yards passing. As you said, they were still rounding into form, finding out who they are. So I think Washington, on a number of counts, is completely, as apt as possible. And that game ended up 24-6. And that was where we saw also Arvell Reese just dominating the Washington quarterback, DeMond Williams, as a spy, as they got after him, they blitzed him, and they completely collapsed the pocket on him. And there's going to be, I think, a similar plan with Bryce Underwood. But yeah, I would say Washington in a number of areas. I was surprised when I saw those numbers that Washington was comparable to Michigan, because you wouldn't expect that. But even overall, Michigan is only 2 spots ahead of them in yards per play allowed in nationally, like 15th and 17th overall.
Yeah, and Michigan is ahead of Washington in SP plus in defense, but they're behind them in offense, which, that Washington offense has some scaling issues and did not scale at all against Ohio State, but looks real shiny against lesser teams. So, but yeah, that's definitely the best comp, and he did not have a incredible lighted up game, but he also did not look remotely overwhelmed at any point in that game either. Second question, what do you rate the chances of Ohio State's running game being a problem for Michigan? It really hasn't been the past 4 years. Big difference for the previous 10 years. I don't know that I think Ohio, define be a problem. Run for 6 yards per carry? No, probably not. I think if Ohio State can run for 4 yards a carry, 4 and some change, that probably is a problem for Michigan, because and I think that's something they can do, because the Ohio State offensive line is pretty good this year. They're not amazing, but they're pretty good. They're certainly a well above average Big Ten offensive line, and the Michigan defensive line is good, but not 2023, 2024 kind of Michigan defensive line, especially in the interior of the defensive line. So, if we're defining, can Ohio State give Michigan trouble with their run game, as can Ohio State run for 4.2 yards per carry? Yeah, 70% chance, 60% chance that they can do that. And to me, that would represent problems, because if they can do that on the ground, then Michigan can't just sit back and can't just have, we'll just rush our 4 and we'll just sit back and defend the pass. You're going to have to deal with the run game at that point. And then that opens stuff up for the pass.
It's interesting looking at the running game over the last 4 years of these last 4 games. Last year, 26 attempts, 77 yards for 3 yards a carry, essentially. 2023, 28 for 107, 3.8. They lose by 6 points. 2022 was their best year. 29 for 143, 4.9 yards per carry. Of course, lost by 22 points. And then in 2021, another rough year, 30 for 64. That was the worst of the 4. If you're telling me Ohio State's rushing for 143 yards or 4.9 yards per carry, I'm going to like their chances. It's just interesting that they did so well in that game in 2022, and yet, the score did not work out that way. Again, who's to say why? But it shows you that you can run the ball pretty well and still lose this game because somebody runs it better, which is, Tom, why you always say whoever runs the ball better wins this game. So by all, any means necessary, make sure you run the ball better than your opponent. That is what you say.
We're just going to move right on to question number 3. Why are Ohio State fans so eager for Ohio State to go wide open on offense when 400 yards of passing and no run game in 2021 versus a strong Michigan run game didn't make it a game? I have questions about how well Michigan's going to be able to run the ball this year. I think they'll be able to run the ball. I don't, this is not like Ohio State's going to shut them down, but if Michigan runs for 4.2 yards per carry and Ohio State runs for 4.2 yards per carry, Ohio State wins, period, full stop. Ohio State is going to be able to do more in the pass game than Michigan can. And I think that some of what you're hearing in terms of Ohio State wanting to just throw the ball in every play, I think that's a little bit of an overreaction to last year, where people remember that game last year one way, and it really wasn't really that way. People remember, Ohio State just ran the ball 50 times between the tackles and didn't do anything, and they just completely ignored their wide receivers. And it's no, that wasn't. If you look at their run-pass balance, they threw the ball more than they ran the ball last year. But everyone kind of has this mentality that, all they did was run ISO. They just ran Dave 42 times in that game. It's like, no, that's not what happened. But so I think that's sort of skewing what you're hearing Ohio State fans say they want to do. I can almost assure you that is not the Ohio State game plan. I'm sure they're going to run the ball, and I'm sure they're going to pass the ball. I think they're going to pick up, you're going to pick up more yards per play through the air than you do on the ground. That's just sort of how it is. I don't think Ohio State, what did you say they had in that 2021 game? Like 2 yards per carry was 30 something rushes for like 60 yards, something like that. They're not going to run for 2 yards a carry in this game. They'll run for 4-ish, give or take. And then that sets stuff up in the passing game. And yeah, I think the other thing is this Michigan secondary is a big red flag to me that, the corners have not been great this year. And, Zeke Berry, Jair Hill, you see them get beat by lesser receivers somewhat regularly. So what is that going to look like against Ohio State? You figure not better, right? So I think that Ohio State fans are looking and saying, these are individual matchups that they have a chance to win. That doesn't mean you're going to do it every time, but there are individual matchups out there that they have a chance to win.
Here's one of my pet peeves with this line of thinking that we always see from Michigan fans, that 2021 wasn't a game. It was a 1-score game with 2 minutes and 30 seconds left. Okay. In the fourth quarter, it was a 1-score game, and Michigan scored at the end to make it a 2-score game. So the idea that it wasn't a game is wrong. The same thing with 2022, when that was a 1-score game midway through the fourth quarter, and then Donovan Edwards went wild. So like, these have been close games throughout. It was a 1-point game at halftime in 2021. And I think one of the key things to keep in mind is, why are these two, why is that season different than this season, or why is that plan different than this plan? And, could you throw it and win? And yes, you could, because one of the things to keep in mind is here's some of the guys who started for Ohio State defensively in 2021 that allowed the 42 points. Marcus Williamson at corner, Teron Vincent, defensive tackle, Ronnie Hickman, who's doing well at safety, but he was out there. Bryson Shaw had an interception in that game, but he eventually transferred out. Cam Brown, one of the corners in Ohio State history that dealt with injuries and never quite lived up to his potential. Denzel Burke, true freshman, starting that year at corner. Jerron Cage at nose tackle. You're looking at a lot of guys who shouldn't have necessarily been at that point, or been starting at that point, or should have been recruited over. And, they gave up 42 points, and Michigan had 4 drives in the second half, 4 touchdowns. So It's not about Ohio State throwing the ball. It's about Michigan not being stopped in the second half. And kind of feel like if Ohio State scores 27 in this one, like they did in 2021, they'll be okay.
Yeah, and of all the guys you just mentioned, I think the only 2 who got drafted were Denzel Burke, who was a true freshman at that point and ultimately got drafted 4 years later, and Ronnie Hickman, who was like a mid-round, 4th, 5th round pick, something like that for the Browns. And, even that was a couple of years later. And, you look at this year's Ohio State team, I can tell you both the corners are going to get drafted. I can tell you that Caleb Downs is going to get drafted. I can tell you both of the starting linebackers are going to get drafted. I can tell you that at least 3 and maybe 4 of the guys starting on the defensive line are going to get drafted. I mean, this is a very different team talent-wise than that was. That was kind of the echo of the transition from Urban Meyer to Ryan Day. And there were some guys towards the end of Ryan Day's tenure that were not, or Urban Meyer's tenure, that were not great recruiters. And so you had just sort of a little bit of gap where you had guys starting who in 2021 and even somewhat in 2022, especially in defense, who just were not Ohio State caliber starters, at least the current level of Ohio State caliber starters. So, how many guys you take the 2021 Ohio State defense and the 2025 Ohio State defense, how many guys from the 2021 Ohio State defense are starting? I think the answer might be 0. And that doesn't even get into the guy who was the defensive coordinator for that team is currently a position coach at Cincinnati. And the guy who is the defensive coordinator for Ohio State this year has them doing stuff that has not been done in college football in decades. in terms of how good the defense have been in terms of points allowed and all that kind of stuff. So,
Well,
it's a very different thing.
yeah, and Cody Simon starting at middle linebacker at that point, then gets benched for 2 years, loses his job for 2 years to Tommy Eichenberg. So, very, very, very different defense.
Yep. And then the last one, and this will be the last one for the show, just how good is Michigan's running game versus Ohio State's run defense, in your opinion? I mentioned earlier, talked to Ross Bolton, who's our X's and O's guy, and you can find that show on our YouTube channel. Just search Ross Bolton Analysis. And he does a great job breaking stuff down. But one of the things we talked about on the defense show for Ohio State this week was Michigan runs a lot of zone. And Ohio State has, Caden McDonald, who can really potentially blow things up in the middle of some of those run plays. Does not mean Michigan's not going to be able to run the ball, but I also don't think Michigan's going to be able to just sort of have their way and just run it down Ohio State's throat. This is not going to be the 2021 Hassan Haskins. Didn't he have 5 touchdowns in that game? Am I remembering that right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think you're going to see Michigan run the ball quite like that in this game. I don't know what their yards per carry was in that game, but I'll take the under in this one. Not just because Michigan's offensive line is solid and coming along, but it's young. This is not a veteran offensive line full of 4th and 5th year guys like they've had so many years in recent seasons. This is a young offensive line. This is a true freshman quarterback. Your best wide receiver is a true freshman. You got a lot of young guys who have not had to do this, who have not had to go up against, the question earlier was about Ohio State's offense and not having to play defense like this. Which defense has Michigan played and looked good against that is in the same stratosphere as Ohio State this year? Because Oklahoma, and again, that was very earlier in the year, and Underwood has come a long way, and Andrew Marsh is really not a factor in that game. But, Michigan got smoked in that game. Michigan looked non-competitive for long stretches of that game. I think they're going to be better than that in this one. But this Ohio State defense is probably better than the Oklahoma defense. So, I think Michigan's going to be able to run the ball. I think, Michigan and Ohio State run the ball for, similar yards per carry, somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 probably. But I don't, Ohio State can live without having 5-something yards a carry on the ground. Like Ohio State's perfectly fine with 4 yards a carry. Michigan, that really makes it more difficult for Michigan to win in my mind.
It feels like Michigan would need to be higher, buoyed by maybe a second home run hit in their rushing total. Their 2 lowest rushing totals this year, 146 against Oklahoma, 109 against USC. Also, their 2 lowest yard per carry games, 4.56 and 3.52. And they scored 13 points in both of those. And I'm going to assume the Oklahoma game was one of those games that is buoyed by a Justice Haynes home run in there, like a 50-yarder. And so now you don't have Haynes. You've got a banged up Jordan Marshall. And we'll assume he goes. And how effective is he going to be against an Ohio State defense that hasn't even given up 100 yards rushing since the season opener against Texas? Now, is the Michigan offense similar to the Texas offense in that you've got a mobile quarterback and you've got good running backs? I would say the Washington offense also had very good mobile quarterback and a very good running back. Jonah Coleman, that was 30 for 61 yards rushing. Now, a lot of that is redacted by the sacks, but I don't see Michigan's running game having the success as they have in the past 4 games, or even, I don't even know that they've been all that dominant. Like the first 2 years kind of skewed everything, and then they've just done pretty well overall in the last 2. But their last 4 games this year, 276, 253, 216, 228. That's a lot to ask in this game, and they've needed all of those yards and against Purdue and Northwestern. They needed every bit of those yards to beat those 2 teams. I don't think you're going to get those yards against Ohio State. So will they even run the ball well enough to win? Because they needed like all of those just to get to 21 and 24 points against 2 pretty mediocre teams, scoring 3 times each time against those guys on the ground. So I don't know what the number would be if 146 was what they did against Oklahoma and they lost 4.6 yards a carry. If they do that against Ohio State, I would assume there's going to be a similar result for them. And 4.6 yards carry isn't bad. 146 yards isn't bad. But I think if you don't have the passing game to go with it, then you need more rushing yards. And I don't know that that's a possibility or a probability.
Yeah, I just pulled up the College Football Nerds model for this game while you were talking, and they use a model where it's based on what you do versus opponents on a per play basis as compared to what they do against everyone else. So are you doing more or less against each of your opponents on a per play basis than everyone else that plays them? So that just kind of, and then they can kind of compare those results. They have Michigan running for 3.84 yards per carry, Ohio State running for 3.27 yards per carry. If both teams are below 4 yards a carry, Ohio State wins. Like, I think, period, full stop. Outside of, the weird edge case where you got 4 turnovers or something like that. I think one other stat that, this is not a stat I will have to explain to you in a lot of detail like that one. I'm just going to read a series of numbers to you. 7, 0, 9, 6, 3, 16, 0, 14, 10, 10, 9. Those are the points that Ohio State has allowed this season. So if we pick Michigan to score 17 points in this game, we're picking Michigan to do something that no one else has achieved at all at any point this season. And even, some of the other numbers, some of the numbers that were bigger there, the 16 for Illinois, that was 2 touchdowns in the fourth quarter. That was essentially garbage time scores in the second half that got them to 16. So, this is an Ohio State defense that is really historically just completely an outlier against just about anything else. We keep seeing these stats on the broadcast every week where, this is the first team since 1993 Florida State to allow whatever it is, 42 points through 7 games or something like that. And this is the first team since Oklahoma in 1987 to allow fewer than whatever points through 11 games. And, it's very easy to look and go, yeah, well, they haven't played good offenses. It's like, yeah, the Big Ten has been a thing for a long time. Like, there have been bad offenses in the Big Ten and around the country for a lot of years. And there's still no one has done this. Like, at some point just dominating bad competition means you're, really, really good and a historical outlier. And this is not a Michigan offense that is an absolute world beater. This is a Michigan offense that's good, solid, but not incredible. I think they were in the 40s or something like that in offensive SP plus this week. They're fine, and they're certainly getting better, but this is not a top 5 national or a historical outlier Michigan offense by any means. And, it's young quarterback, young wide receiver, banged up running back, young offensive line. I mean, there's lots of reasons why they're not amazing this year. This is not the year where Michigan has all the veteran guys and everything is sort of aligned for them like it was in 2023. And even then, that Michigan team needed needed a turnover to get set up a easy touchdown, and also got to the point where Ohio State was driving and in Michigan territory with a chance to win in the final minute of the game. So, this is a year where I think everyone for Michigan probably expected this to be a little bit of a rebuilding year, and they have won a lot of the kind of coin flip games that we thought, they could go 8-4, they could go 10-2, and they've won a lot of those kind of close games. They've won some of their clunkers, so they're in a position now to potentially, if you win on Saturday, you go 10-2, and you probably make the playoff, which would be, that's about a 90th percentile outcome for this Michigan team, but. You still need a lot of stuff to go right for that to happen.
Tom, the Ohio State defense has given up 2 touchdowns in the first half this season, both on the ground. That's pretty impressive. Now, have I just guaranteed that Michigan will score 2 touchdowns in the first half, and there will be a graphic that says first 11 games, 2 touchdowns allowed in the first half against Michigan, 2 touchdowns allowed in the first half? Probably.
But, so you're telling me Jabril Peppers has never had an interception in college? Really? Wow.
That's what I'm saying. Yep. That's what I'm saying. But that gives you an idea of how locked in and tough this defense is. And the schedule's not been great, but still the defense has been locked in. And then, of course, the second half, they're up, and there's some backups that have been giving up some scores. So this is going to be a tough ask for Michigan to score enough points. It's possible, sure. Like, as I wrote, I think in Michigan Monday or wherever, like based on what happened last year, anything is possible. No matter how much talking we do,
Mhm.
we're never going to be able to out-talk what happened last year. So,
right. Yeah. We can tell you what's probably going to happen or maybe going to happen or what we expect to happen. But, if you can show me your betting slip on the Michigan money line last year, and you can also show me that you don't just bet the Michigan money line literally every week, the people who predict their team to win every single week, and then, what's your record? Well, it was 7-5 last year straight up. Like, okay, that doesn't impress me. Like, show me on, show me the, you holding a piece of a newspaper with the date of something before the game last year and your score prediction that Michigan is going to beat Ohio State. And I will give you all the credit in the world. I suspect there are not many people who can do that.
I suspect as well. So that will do it for this episode. I think we have one more full of listener questions from the Michigan fans. And really, it's for everybody. All right. We're all enjoying it. We're all talking this game, as you guys have found out by your YouTube feed and your podcast feeds. And yes, you're all very welcome. Thank you all for the feedback. We appreciate it. Good to know that our hard work, mine especially, is being appreciated. And I thank you for the feedback. And of course, if you want to hit the thumbs up for more feedback, we would appreciate that. And 5-star rating and reviews on the podcast, as you know, all of that. So that will do it from here. I want to thank you all for tuning in, and we will talk to you all later.